You're tired of pretending you don't care. Tired of acting strong when your chest feels like it's caving in. Tired of scrolling, replaying, analyzing every moment, and wondering if the story is really over, or if he'll ever realize what he walked away from. Will he come back, the psychology that makes him regret losing you? Listen closely. Not every man leaves because you weren't enough. Sometimes he leaves because he wasn't ready to meet the version of himself you needed. Sometimes he walks away because comfort felt easier than growth, because love with you required honesty, depth, accountability, because you saw him too clearly, and that terrified him. Here's the part no one tells you. Regret doesn't hit him when you cry, or when you chase, or when you prove you care. Regret hits when silence replaces pressure, when your absence becomes louder than your presence, when he sees another man giving you the peace he once disrupted, when he realizes you didn't break, you evolved. Your power isn't in punishment. It's in detaching from what hurt you and becoming someone he no longer recognizes because you are no longer waiting at the same emotional door. He doesn't regret losing the version of you who begged. He regrets losing the version of you who learned. The woman who now protects her energy, knows her worth, and doesn't negotiate with emotional crumbs. If he returns, it won't be because he suddenly discovered love, but because he finally understood the value he once mishandled. And if he doesn't, you didn't lose a soulmate. You released a lesson. It felt like waking up in a room that used to be warm, now echoing with cold air that doesn't belong to you anymore. The silence became its own soundtrack, heavy humming like a quiet ache behind your ribs. You move through your days slow, like your body is here but your mind keeps replaying soft memories that now feel sharp. His voice still lingers in certain words, certain songs, certain corners of the bed where the sheets still hold the shape of where he used to lie. You scroll without meaning to, searching for signs that he remembers, that he notices, that he feels something. Your breath catches when his name appears anywhere, even accidentally. Your chest tightens when it doesn't. You try to eat, but everything tastes muted. You try to sleep, but the night feels too loud. You rehearse conversations you'll never have, imagining answers he'll never give, hoping clarity might soothe the hunger in your heart. You replay the last goodbye like a film you can't pause. The tone of his voice, distant, tired, unfamiliar. The way the air felt heavier after he left, like the walls were holding their breath with you. You notice how your hands feel empty without something to hold, how your phone feels heavier with no new messages, how your reflection looks like someone trying not to break. You pretend you're fine around others, laughing with a slightly delayed rhythm, nodding even when you aren't really listening. You isolate not because you want to, but because you don't know how to explain this invisible bruise. Your mind searches for what you could have done differently, even though deep down a quiet whisper tells you that love shouldn't require self-abandonment. You ache not just for him, but for the version of yourself who once felt chosen, safe, seen. And beneath all of it, there's a tiny spark, small, fragile, but still alive, whispering that one day this heaviness will loosen its grip. You're not hurting only because he left. You're hurting because you attached your identity to being chosen. You weren't just missing him. You were missing who you thought you were when he loved you. You weren't grieving a man. You were grieving the meaning you built around him. You weren't crying because it ended. You were crying because you didn't get closure from the version of you who gave her all. It wasn't his silence that tortured you. It was how it confirmed your deepest fear. Maybe you weren't enough. It wasn't the breakup that broke you. It was the unanswered why. You weren't waiting for him to return. You were waiting to feel worthy again. You thought his return would heal you, but you were really craving validation, not love. You kept replaying what happened, because your nervous system doesn't know how to put down a story that never finished. You weren't addicted to him. You were addicted to the emotional highs and lows that felt like proof that it mattered. You didn't want him to see your pain. You wanted him to realize what he meant without you having to bleed to prove it. You kept imagining the reunion because your mind prefers fantasy over emptiness. You kept thinking he was the missing piece when the missing piece was the self-trust you abandoned while loving him. You felt powerless when he walked away. Because somewhere along the journey you handed him the responsibility for your happiness. You feared letting go, because letting go means accepting that your love alone can't fix someone. You wanted a different ending. Not because it was destiny, but because you invested your heart, your time, your hope. And here is the deepest truth. You didn't lose someone meant for you. You lost someone who wasn't ready for the love you were willing to give. Your pain isn't proof that something is wrong with you. It's proof that you loved fully, courageously, without holding back. And the moment you realize this, the moment you no longer need him to regret, return, or explain, is the moment you finally free yourself. What if the pain isn't just about losing him, but about realizing how far you drifted from yourself to keep love from slipping away? When did you first learn that love meant proving your value instead of simply existing as worthy? How long will you carry the belief that if you're good enough, no one will ever leave? Maybe it wasn't him you were trying to hold on to. Maybe you were trying to hold on to the part of you that felt safe when someone stayed. The part that wanted love to mean certainty, not guessing. The part that needed consistency, not emotional roulette. What if your deeper wound was never about him walking away, but about how quickly you believed it was your fault? How long have you been confusing attachment with destiny, intensity with love, and effort with guarantee? When did you start thinking you needed to earn what should have been freely given? You love deeply, not because you're weak, but because your heart speaks in devotion, not in half measures. You care loudly because emotional connection is your language, not emotional distance. But what happens when you give your love like oxygen to someone who only knows how to inhale and never exhale? How long will you keep shrinking just to keep the peace? How long will you keep translating silence into hope? How long will you measure your worth through someone else's ability to handle your depth? What if the real pattern is this? You choose potential over reality because you see who someone could become. You pour yourself into unfinished souls because you want to be the reason they finally heal. You try to love people out of their wounds, even if it means reopening your own. When did you forget that your heart is a home, not a rehabilitation center? When did you accept that love must hurt first before it feels safe? When did you start believing that emotional crumbs were better than being alone at the table? How long will you ignore your needs just to avoid feeling too much? How long will you chase clarity from someone who can barely face themselves? What if the fear isn't losing love, but facing the emptiness that tells you to rebuild from your own roots? And maybe the most important question of all, what if the love you keep trying to find in someone else has been quietly waiting for you to return back to yourself? What you're feeling makes sense. You didn't imagine the connection, the hope, or the future you pictured with him. Your heart didn't break because you were naive. It broke because you cared with sincerity, depth, and intention. Anyone who loves the way you do will feel pain when something meaningful slips away. So don't shame yourself for hurting. You loved with honesty, and that is never a mistake. But now it's time to gently shift the story you've been telling yourself. You were not abandoned because you were unworthy. You were not left because you lacked something. His departure was not a measurement of your value. It was a reflection of where he was in his emotional capacity, his readiness, and his growth. Some people don't know how to stay where love asks them to evolve. You are not hard to love. You were simply willing to love at a level he hadn't reached yet. This does not make you broken. It makes you brave. You're allowed to grieve the version of your life you thought you were stepping into, but you are not meant to stay trapped in the doorway of what could have been. The chapter ended, but you are still here, still breathing, still becoming. Your story is not stuck, it is unfolding. You can honor what was real while still releasing what is no longer aligned with your future. Start replacing the old narrative, one belief at a time, instead of he left because I wasn't enough. Breathe in. Sometimes people walk away because they cannot meet the level of the love they're given. Instead of if I had done more, it wouldn't have ended. Whisper, real love doesn't require self-erasure to survive. Instead of something is wrong with me, learn to say I deserve someone who is ready for the depth I offer. This isn't about pretending it doesn't hurt. It's about understanding what the pain is guiding you toward. Emotional safety, reciprocal effort, peace that doesn't collapse, and love that feels like home, not a battlefield. You are not walking out of this weaker. You are walking out wiser, clearer, softer, and stronger. And whether he comes back or not is no longer the question. The real wisdom is realizing that your healing is not dependent on his return, but on your union with yourself. The woman you were before loved with fear in her bones, afraid of losing, afraid of not being enough, afraid of being forgotten. She reached, she chased, she waited for proof. She tried to earn what she already deserved. She lived with a heart that begged instead of a heart that received. But the woman who rises after healing is different. She no longer wonders if she is worthy. She knows she is. She stops asking, why wasn't I enough? And starts saying, I am not for everyone, and that is my power. The old you searched for safety in someone else. The new you becomes safety within yourself. The old you whispered, please stay. The new you whispers, if you can't love me fully, you may go. There is a softness in her eyes, but still in her boundaries. A calmness in her voice, but thunder in her self-respect. A warmth in her heart, but clarity in her standards. She walks differently, slower, surer. She is no longer hungry for validation. She is nourished by her own self-trust. She smiles without forcing it, sleeps without replaying memories like unfinished storms, breathes without wondering who might leave next. Her silence is no longer fear. It is self-mastery. Her solitude is no longer punishment. It is her sanctuary. And now her love is no longer a plea. It is a gift. Not everyone will earn it. Not everyone will hold it. And she is finally at peace with that. Because the healed woman doesn't hope to be chosen. She chooses. Here is the final truth. The one that settles like calm rain on the heart. Healing doesn't erase the love you gave. It transforms the place it lives. It stops living in the memory of who left and starts living in the becoming of who you are. Because real closure isn't when they apologize, return, or finally understand. Real closure is when your heart stops waiting and starts creating a future that no longer needs their shadow to feel whole. You don't heal by proving they made a mistake. You heal by becoming someone who would never again abandon herself for love. And that is where your story turns. Not when he regrets losing you, but when you no longer regret choosing yourself. That is the moment you finally come home.